All right, mayoral candidate David O. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
So let's start with the very first question. What made you decide now was the time for you to run for mayor?
Well, there's really two things. One is that I think the city, from my perspective, is at a very, very important point in that things have gone so wrong. Much of it is really beyond anybody's control. It was COVID, it was George Floyd, it was rioting, it was, all of the forces that have come together. And what I mean is the bad forces, poor quality education, lack of job opportunities, general feeling of neglect and being discarded throughout our city, and culminated in um, a lot of violence, a lot of crime, a lot of murders. And I think if there was ever a time for some well-intended policies that is very light on law enforcement, this was not the time for it. It just kind of combined at a really bad time, and the result of which it really kind of exacerbated the situation where we are now in a continuous cycle of violent crime and fear. And it's changed people's behaviors. First of all, we have a lot of people who left the city. We have a lot of professionals like school teachers, social workers who are leaving their jobs here in Philadelphia. We have prison workers who don't want to work in our prisons. We don't have space. We have really bad conditions. There are a lot of things that are going on. The economy is really suffering. And because of that, the burdens are most likely going to fall on the poorest people in our city. That means real estate taxes and other types of taxes. And people's buying power has been sharply reduced. I mean, if people had $100 in the bank, now it's worth like 60, right? So people are losing money. So while they're getting money, their dollars are purchasing less. And so all of this coming together, I think it is really important that we give people a choice. And so the choice, I think, has to be much clearer. That is, how are we going to deal with deadly violence? How are we going to actually improve education? How are we going to bring jobs into the city that people can actually get those jobs and get paid? And how are we going to basically uplift the morale of the city in the areas of our city that it's most needed? So I think, after everything that's happened, we cannot continue to decline the way we are. I think there has to be a complete turnaround of this city. And I think there is no easy way to do it. And I think that's one of the problems, because in politics, what sells is a lot of fanciful, idealistic things. The prettier the words, the nicer the concepts, the more people like it. The problem is we have been doing that for years now, and it's been an utter failure. The utter failure means we have dead bodies, we have injured people, we have injured mentality, and I don't see that is going to get better. There's always a competition for the goodies when it comes to electing a mayor, and that's why there's so much money in these races. And this is the most expensive mayor's race that we've had. Races seem to no longer be about how much money you can raise from your family, friends, and neighbors. Races nowadays seems to be about super PACs and dark money. I mean, just the amount of money that are brought in. But there isn't anyone doing that who isn't tied to something they want. And wanting something good for the public is fine, but so much of that is really based on status quo or changes that are very competitive because someone has a bottom line to receive. So I think all of that means it's important to offer the voters a different choice. And so the other thing that I look at is I've served for 3 terms, 11 years. I could do another 4. That would be 16 years. In the additional 4, am I going to contribute anything important? I don't think so. I think everything that we've talked about, from education reform to improving families' quality of life, criminal justice reform, economic opportunity, I think I've introduced bills on all of them, and most of my bills have been defeated. Even my resolutions have been defeated, and more so. We're in more and more of a political polarized climate, where even good ideas are going to be rejected simply because of the political party. And I'm in the minority, I'm a Republican. So my ideas are easily defeated by simply saying, yeah, it sounds nice, but he's a Republican, so there's something suspect about what he's doing. And people will oftentimes say, well, you might have a point there, right? So it becomes difficult as a legislator. I think what's important is then that you offer the people the choice. They either take the choice or they don't. But that is that I think is very important. The circumstance, and then, is it a situation today? Is this a race that I can win? So sometimes, and a lot of times, the idea of giving people a choice is not really so much about winning, but if you can't win, what choice are you really giving people? And so this race is also unusual because it's not really so much about the forces that typically get people elected. I said in the primary that I don't think this race is about money, and there's a ton of money in it. And money is always important. You have to have a certain amount of money, but more than that, I don't know you need, simply because when people generally get the idea, the ones who are going to vote are going to vote. Doesn't matter how many more times you tell them what you want to tell them. They pretty much have made up their minds. I think this is that kind of election. And I also have some other information that I look at. So to me, it's a winnable race, but it has to go through, it has to unfold in the way that is kind of set out. It is really a very predictable process.
So what, a Republican really hasn't held the office since I think the 40s. It's been a very long time. What kind of coalitions do you have to build in order to get that a base for you, and then take that to victory?
So the coalition has to be this: you have to have a certain percentage, not a majority, but a certain percentage of a variety of voters, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. There are people who vote purely on party lines. And many of them are not coming out to vote. They're just not coming out. They're not driven to vote. If you just want to vote Democrat or you just want to vote Republican, I don't think they're coming out to vote. The people who, for example, simply want to vote D for Democrat, in their minds, they already have a winner. They don't need to come out. And this is not an exciting race for many people. If you want status quo, you got it. It is an exciting race for people who want change. And those people include Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. But they're really kind of identified by their communities. Do you think of yourself as an artist? Do you think of yourself as, a working Joe? Do you think of yourself as someone who is looking at a more global economy in Philadelphia? Are you very interested in reforming city government to get past what you believe is complacency and corruption? Those people are interested, or they are people that can vote but never had a reason to vote. They're not voting on issues, they're just voting on the idea that government has never responded to them, it's never been interested in them. So if they have someone who is interested, they want to be counted. And so they come out to vote for the person who sees and hears them. In that case, that's me. And if you have a large enough group of them, then that makes the difference in the vote count. So all elections are based on vote count, right? We just went through a primary. Everybody knew that although there are 800,000 Democrats, that only 300,000 were going to vote at most 300,000. And people pretty much can tell of the 800,000 Democrats, which ones are going to vote, who are the 300,000. And then any of the candidates, or all of the candidates, any of the candidates who know anything, they are not focusing on trying to reach all 300,000. They're focusing on 50, 20, another 20, and another 10. They're focused on 100,000 people. And so that's where the election is. By the same token, when we get into the general election is different than the last 20 years of elections. And, we only have municipal elections every, like mayoral elections every 4 years. So you can't really go by the pattern of the last mayoral election or the one before it, because you didn't have candidates that could bring out a vote. So you'd have to accurately calculate what is the turnout on November 7th and who is voting. And I don't know that people have been doing that in this city in the last 20 years. But I have, right? Because I have to run my race that way. I've run 5 times and I have calculated the vote 5 times. And the vote for me in the primary is very different than the vote for me in the general. And I think I show that to people every time I run. The reason for that, and the reason for some of the miscalculations, I think, in the primary is each category of race is very different. For example, if you have a pool of, let's say, 120,000 Republicans, and you have an uncontested race, which is the mayoral race, how many people are coming out? Well, that's the maximum. You can't get any Democrats, you can't get any independents, you can't get any third party. And what happens is that is the maximum number you can get in the Republican primary. That is not the maximum number I can get in the general election, because that becomes a different race. And what happens in the general election is the number of Democratic voters reduces. It doesn't increase, it declines. And the reason for that is because people have voted in the Democratic primary, their candidates lost, and many of them are not interested in voting in the general. When their candidate loses, the entire operation shuts down. There's no more campaign office, no more advertising, no more purchasing, there's no more staff, there's no more people working the streets, there's no more printing, there's no more mailers, there's no more any of that. And so you have a winner, and the winner is declared the winner of the entire election. And a lot of them feel like they don't need to come out and vote because the election's over. So the number of Democrats who vote in the general election reduces. And in the last 20 years, there's a small number of independents and Republicans who come out. They're just small in number, right? It's 7 to 1 in this city registration. And so they don't really have many people who come out. But in November of this year, that number is going to increase on both sides, the number of Republicans and the number of independents, and the number of Democrats who will vote for me is larger than normal.
Okay, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Homelander.
Hey, Denise, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I guess my first question for you is, and I've said this at events that I've been asked to attend by the Republican Party, to ask, why is it that Republicans don't seem to be getting any traction in Philadelphia? And one thing that I've always said, and I've always been consistent about this, is that until you get your national nuts in check, it's going to be hard for us to look past them. For all intents and purposes, and there's no other way to put this, the national Republican nuts have gotten even nuttier over the last few years. So the question I have for you is, how do you get past that? Because you have traditionally been your favorite Democrat's favorite Republican. How have you managed to do that, and how are you going to do that in this race?
So, what I do is I don't try to answer that question for folks. I mean, they're going to think what they're going to think, and that's perfectly fine. What I do, however, is I leave that to when they vote for president, senator, congressperson, governor, whatever they want to do. But here in the city of Philadelphia, the problem is not the Republicans in charge. And the Democratic Party may blame Harrisburg or Washington, D.C., that's fine. But what it comes down to is you have to hold the people accountable. Now, you can replace them with another Democrat, that's not a problem. But you have to hold the people in charge accountable for all the failings of this city. And there's just so many. We couldn't even begin to name them as far as the people are concerned. But just to start with a few: inequity in education, injustice in the court systems, in the processes, removing people's children without cause or reason, unfair, accurate assessments that lead to very high taxes that are pushing people out of their communities, neighborhoods. The violence, over policing, two, no policing, right? Either way you look at it, there's a problem here, there's a problem there. And so what will happen in the future if this is not addressed? Well, most likely we're going to have continued violence. We're going to have continued murders the way it's going. There will be an overreaction. The overreaction of over-policing is bad for the police, it's bad for law enforcement, and it's bad for the community. I say that because we're already talking about, quote, constitutional stop and frisk. As a former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, I absolutely understand the subject matter. It is difficult for people to understand. Even when journalists try to write about it, they oftentimes don't get it correct. There is constitutional stop and frisk. It arises all by itself. You cannot create it. And therefore, yes, if the circumstances arise that you have reasonable articulable suspicion that a person has committed a crime and is armed and dangerous, you can stop them. And before you continue questioning them, you can pat them down. They are not guilty. You don't have probable cause that they committed the crime, any of those things, but you have the legal ability to pat them down for your safety. And if you feel something that may be a weapon, cannot be anything else but a weapon, you can search further. And if you retrieve it, it is admissible in court. What you cannot do, and I would just say again and again, it is impossible to do. You cannot tell your police to go out to Malcolm X Park or something, and start eyeing up people and see if you can imagine why they might be armed and dangerous and have committed a crime. It is not a thing that can be done. And therefore, no matter how you try to reshape that whole, theory, all you're doing is you're twisting to a degree that you're trying to justify that your police will go out and conduct unconstitutional, illegal searches, which will lead to the police being the abusers of the laws that they're supposed to enforce. And that creates what the problem we have right now. We have a great distrust of police. And so that has to absolutely not happen. So for me, to focus on what is controlled in the city, there are many people, particularly in our poorest and most violent neighborhoods, that don't know how they're going to pay their taxes. And when they look at their taxes, it makes no sense at all. Their homes are being assessed at values far beyond what any reasonable person would be able to consider. And yet, if they don't come up with those taxes, if they don't pay that water bill, their homes are in jeopardy. And so much of what is happening in Philadelphia's poorest communities is that their homes are in jeopardy. The level of stress and anxiety is terrible. And there isn't a relief. You just add those things together. The violence on the way to school, the violence in school, the lack of quality education, the lack of jobs, the fact that many young people don't see a brighter future, and they are acting out in ways that our society is recoiling at, and action is wanted. So how will that be dealt with? I mean, that is all really dealt with here in the city of Philadelphia through our mayor. Yeah, we have a city council, but our city council passes legislation. And sometimes that legislation is very important, but most of the time, there are plenty of laws on the books. You can have your choice of which one you want. It just depends nowadays on which ones the mayor is going to enforce and how the mayor is going to enforce it. We have some other elected officials, but whatever their role is, it is rather small compared to what the mayor does. The mayor gives out the money. The mayor is in charge of all the city workers of Philadelphia, and the decisions of the mayor, what they will and won't do, is critical to the next 4 years. So I tell people, whatever you think about Washington, D.C., national politics, state politics, that's fine. But you cannot give a pass to the people in this city, because when you do, you are allowing things to continue in a very inferior manner. If you have another Democrat to choose from, that's great. But so many times, when that process is done, people are not satisfied because there was an entire machine to get through, and the machine is very effective in this city. And so we end up rarely having another candidate to choose from in the general election. There almost never is. This time there is, and I'm a candidate that many people are comfortable with, despite being a Republican, and they're comfortable voting for me. And they're kind of at their wits' end with the stalemate and stagnation that has occurred in this city. So it's really actually not that hard for me to get around at this point in time.
Okay. So another thing that I kind of wanted to touch on with you is, are you getting support from Philadelphia's Republican Party? Because you haven't had that always. Are you getting support from them? And will that support take the form of money? Because you mentioned that you don't necessarily want to go to dark money route, and that it should be about, friends and family and stuff, but you're going to be dealing with an opponent that does have a PAC. So I guess, how are you going to get around that?
So I want to clarify that I'm saying that nowadays elections seem to be that we've gone past how much you can raise to what super PAC is going to get behind you. In my case, I don't have any super PACs, and I don't really have any large PACs either. So I already calculate that I'm going to have less funds in the general election. Is the Republican Party going to help me? That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to it. Yes, I have had my differences with the Republican Party of Philadelphia, mainly around the fact that I was not one of their guys, so to speak. And sometimes parties like to have party discipline. And that means that someone believes that they're the one to give the orders. And they're not an elected official. They're a party official. That's different from me. Right now, I'm a Republican running to be the mayor of basically a majority Democratic city, and not by a little bit, right? Overwhelmingly Democrat. I'm not trying to change people's registrations. What I tell them is, the values that you see within the Democratic Party, the Democratic philosophy, the Democratic perspective, they are wonderful things, especially when we talk about humanity and compassion and all those things, equality and righting wrongs. Do you see that in your neighborhood? And the answer is no. I don't have to wait for the answer. Yeah, we're a city of neighborhoods. And so yeah, there'll be a few neighborhoods where people love their, their everything's great and it's fantastic for them. But all across our city, that's not what people see. And they want to see it. And I'm saying to them, who is going to deliver that to you? Because time and time again, it has not been delivered. And there's no reason why it hasn't been delivered. It should be delivered. It's required to be delivered. So for me, as a elected official, I am not touting some type of national script or statewide script. So that takes me at odds with the party. And the party looks at its assets, right? So for example, the parking authority. At that time, it was perceived by the party to be one of their assets. However, when they're asking me to raise parking rates and raise taxes, I look at the money that they're collecting off the curbs of our city, and I say, oh, that money's supposed to go to the school district. And I'm an attorney, so I understand why it's supposed to go to school district. I'm simply saying that the way the parking authority was seized and what has happened to it in the historical process is wrong. And the city should have a level of control so it can know what money is there, where it's going, and we can get the portion of the money, which is large, to the school district. That's actually what it was supposed to do. Since it is not doing that, as a legislator, I like to introduce a bill to take back control of on-street parking. And then we could get into a cooperation agreement. But because of that, that is seen as like an aggressive move on the Republican Party. And we've had other differences as well. So as you know, I've been opposed by the Republican Party for basically all of my elections. And most recently, they put out mailers without me on it. I'm the endorsed mayoral candidate, but I'm not on the mailers that they send out, which I think, it is not a good idea because it doesn't get people excited to come out and vote. And then on the election day sample ballot, I was the only person not listed on it. So there was no button number or name or anything. So, but they tell me that they are with me for the general. But that really has to do with they wanted me to unendorse somebody. And that person was someone they recruited to run for office. They had a falling out with him. I wasn't there. I don't know anything about it. But I did endorse that person, for city council at large. And I saw no legitimate reason to unendorse someone that was endorsed. And quite frankly, sometimes they want me to endorse people that aren't really candidates. They're really just there to put a name on the ballot. And I don't do that because there is another person. And that person might be a Democrat or whomever they are. But I really endorse people because I think they will do a good job, or I know who they are, or they offer the voter something. But I don't want to just go through kind of endorsing people because that is something that someone asked me to do without really a good reason. The party generally has not been able to raise money, and typically I put out a pretty good field operation. I didn't in the primary because I didn't really need to. I didn't have an opponent. And in the primary, I'm not really concerned about losing the primary. I'm concerned about speaking to the public. And that's really the important thing about the primary. It's not so much that I have to speak to Republicans only. I have to speak to everybody. And I think that in this city, if you are a Republican or independent, you will get a ton of information about the Democratic candidates. You can't vote for them in the primary, but you will have a chance to vote for them in the general. but that's a good time to look at the apples versus apples, right? But in this city, there's no comparable amount of information that is being put to the public about me. And therefore, many people don't even know I'm in a race. They think that the entire race consists of the Democratic candidates because that's all the profiles, that's all the Inquirer does, it's KYW profiles. And there are, I think, maybe like 6 televised debates, and I was invited to one, and there's 5 without me, right? So I think that in this situation, the Republican Party could have distributed at least to the Republican voters that they're reaching through the mail, that we do have Councilman David O, you know him, he's running for mayor. And then to have me on the sample ballot and have people out distributing. But I don't think they really had too many people distributing at the polls. So I will take care of that myself, as I usually do. But now I do have to, cover ground because the media in general continues to say that there's really not a good reason to come out and vote on November 7th. So I find that to be contradictory. Telling people how important it is to vote and how dismal our turnout was, we got to vote, and then just saying basically the race is over. So you're sending 2 different messages out, and I'm not telling the press what to do or say. I'm just saying I find that, like, if the press truly believes there's no contest here, that's fine. I mean, I'm not trying to tell them to say there is a contest if they don't think there is one. But I do think, however, that they do have to, include some coverage when you're going into a general election, when there are differences of opinions or differences in history. And I think that's important. The Republican Party's role is unknown to me at this point in time. So I can't really plan around that. What I can say is certain members of the Republican Party or city committee, I think they will be helpful, and some of them have tried to be helpful in the ways that they can. But they sometimes are limited by what the party wants, right? So that's the thing about parties. You may want to do something, but there's party discipline. So I think that's a little up in the air. When it comes to everybody else, the state party, the national party, all that kind of thing, they are typically not interested in municipal races. And I think that's a big difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The Democratic Party is very interested in municipal races and puts a lot of effort into winning local races as a way of having influence and support for their statewide races and their national races. I think that is a smart thing to do.
Well, I guess my last question for you is, because, you mentioned, the media coverage and the fact that you were only invited to one debate, and I think it was the one I moderated.
Was that the one at Holy Family
Well, no.
University?
Oh, no, that one wasn't televised, the one that I moderated. So.
Yeah.
But
I was only invited to one televised debate.
Okay.
Well, forum. It wasn't really a debate.
All right. Well, I guess my question for you is, are you hoping that there are more debates so there can be more of a, I guess, an exchange of ideas? And have you talked to the Parker campaign about this yet?
So I am drafting a letter with a proposal because I don't want to just send a letter and say, let's talk about debates. What I want to say is, here are 10 dates for 10 debates in the 10 councilmatic districts of Philadelphia before a live audience in different locations that I hope you find to be acceptable, because that's where we had the forums at. For example, we could do it Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church, that's in the Northwest. We can do Esperanza. We had one there, in the Latino community. We can go to community college. We can go to University Penn. We had one out there, for West Philly. I think we can find suitable places to go in front of the different geographic locations of our city. And I think 10 is good. We have 10 councilmatic districts. On top of that, 5 televised debates, because we have at least roughly 5 major networks, from NBC, CBS, ABC, 17 and 29. We can certainly do that. And the other folks can come in and cover that. So I would propose that we do this before mail-in ballots start happening. There's no point in doing debates at like October 30th. Mail-in ballots have already occurred. And it's too close to the election. I think people need the time to digest, and so my point is this is really about public service. We are running for mayor. It is a critical time. I think there are issues where there are questions. In other words, did the candidate oppose something and now is for it? Are they opposing something now that they were previously for? And that's perfectly fine. But what is that about? How credible is that? What is your reasoning? Like, can you give us your reason? Is this really just based on polling? Do you kind of campaign based on what the polls tell you to say? And what if the polls change? Or is this what you really believe in? Are you going to fight for it? Are you going to stay with it through thick and thin? So, I think that's important for people to know. And I think, people have complained about the way the debates happen. First of all, there's so many candidates, it's a 90-second answer. You really can't scratch the surface that way. They're long and, they don't get much kind of interaction between the candidates. The candidates actually know what the other candidates have said and done. I think a lot more than the moderators. Some of the moderators are very professional and they do know a lot, but not as much as we who are there all the time interfacing with each other and know what happened behind the scenes and what the votes are and how the votes broke down and things like that. So I think that's important because all of this is about transparency and bringing before the voters the best type of information they can have, and certainly allowing people from the audience to ask questions and having not a 30-second or 90-second answer, but a more complete answer. So let's say maybe not as many questions, but certainly more in depth about, the questions that are most important to people. And you have enough, those are 15 different debates. It's enough to cover a lot and let people get a chance to see what they are voting for. Because this election is not about me or Sherelle Parker. This election is about the people and what they can expect or what they hope for the future and who they're going to vote for that is going to really change what is going on right now in our city and has been for so long, to give them and their children a better life, a better future here in Philadelphia.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to give you back to my co-host, Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPN 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. And candidate O, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right.